Good afternoon, I'm Pat Guar, clinical psychologist, and today I'd like to talk about the parts and the whole of well-being. Now, unfortunately in life, all of us have probably had some quite unpleasant, quite challenging past experiences. Fortunately though, many of us have also had a number of positive past experiences. So one of the separate parts we need to think about is our past. Now, in addition to that, we have our future, and again, we can have worries and anxiety about our future, apprehension, or we might be quite looking forward to our future, and it can be quite exciting. And again, we have our present, and I'm sure you're going to guess now, some of our present experiences can be quite pleasant, and some of our present experiences can be quite unpleasant. Now, the past and the future and the present are all interconnected. It's really interesting when you look at memory. When we have information about an event given to us after an event, our recollection of that event, past event, actually changes. When we're told something before an event, it also changes our recollection of an event. So the way we approach an event influences how we remember it and how we engage with it. And the information we have after an event also changes it. So one of the things I want you to think about when we think about our past is the event is fixed. So we can't go back and change the event, but the meaning is fluid. And in one of the previous videos, I gave a story about the Taoist farmer and the horse and how a single event over time, the meaning of it and the impact changes. Now, what happens when we are facing a challenging situation or something from our past kind of comes up and bites us and we have an intrusive memory, a nightmare, a flashback, or when we have worries about our future? What you remember, if you've seen the other videos, is I've drawn it as a big, powerful, uncomfortable spike. Now, the reason it's this big, powerful, uncomfortable spike is just like trying to hold a horse chestnut. It's very, very difficult to kind of hold that uncomfortable feeling. Very quickly and automatically, this gets us into an emotional mind. So if you remember, or if you've seen the previous videos, I've talked about the different types of mind you can have, and we can have a reasonable mind, a logical mind, which is based on logic and facts. We can have an emotional mind, which is very much based upon our emotions, and in the middle, where there's the balance, the synthesis between logic and emotion, we have what we call our wise mind. Now, this is a very common concept in mindfulness, but it's also a major part of many other approaches. And indeed, I talk in a previous video about how the ancient Greeks talked about to have true wisdom, you have to balance logic with emotion. That's where true wisdom lies. And Athena, the goddess of wisdom, was known to balance compassion and emotions with logic and facts in order to make the right decision. So we have this horrible, spiky feeling, and as I said, it's really, really spiky, it's really, really uncomfortable. We can avoid that, we can push it away, we can use drugs, alcohol, self-harm, other things like that, and try and bubble wrap it, but the more times we try and cover it up, the bigger those spikes will get. And eventually they poke through whatever we're doing to protect it. And you remember, in the past, I've talked about our body sensations, we've got our emotions, we have our actions, and we have our thoughts. Now, this here is kind of the really interesting thing, because that's where the traction happens. Remember, the future hasn't happened yet. The past is gone, and the present, where this spiky, uncomfortable feeling, where this is all going on in the here and now, is where action happens. Now, when we have this spiky, uncomfortable feeling, we get ourselves into emotional mind, and our body sensations are going to be very powerful and very overwhelming. So if we put powerful here, our emotions again, they're also going to be very powerful, very overwhelming. So let's put overwhelming. Our thoughts are more likely to be unhelpful. I can't cope, I can't do this, this will be a disaster, it's always going to be like this. And you'll find if you've ever had depression or anxiety or those worry type thoughts, those thoughts will come very, very quickly and just constantly come. And your actions, you'll avoid, you'll escape, you might use drugs, you might use alcohol, you might use various other things. So what you have here is this very vicious cycle, and this vicious cycle goes back to reinforced and kind of match up with all of those past experiences which have been unpleasant. So this gets bigger. It goes into your future worries, so this gets bigger. So what happens is this spike, this very uncomfortable feeling, which is really driven by your emotions, feeds into your body sensations, your thoughts, your actions, and it goes back and it makes your worries and anxieties about the future, your regrets. So what happens is people end up being defined by these unpleasant experiences. So these pleasant experiences, which we all have, become much smaller, and the unpleasant experiences become bigger and bigger. And of course, when these unpleasant experiences become bigger and bigger, we tune into them more, we're more likely to notice them, we're more likely to see them. So here, we start looking out. So you can see very quickly that our past experiences, what's happened to us in the past, and our worries and concerns about the future, combined with what happens to us in our present, all are interconnected. We try and make predictions about how this event here will turn out in the future based upon what we know about the past. And of course, if our past experiences have been unpleasant, we tend to look out for and notice more unpleasant things. We tend to remember more unpleasant things. We tend to make more predictions about the future being unpleasant. And this vicious cycle gets worse and feeds back into them. And this becomes very, very overwhelming very, very quickly, and it's really hard to know where to start. So one of the reasons I've drawn this out is if you start to know that, well, what can I do about my past? What can I do about my future? What can I do about the present? You can start thinking of 3 different areas that you can focus on. If you start to become aware that these very powerful emotions, these very powerful thoughts are beginning to kind of prick through and really feel quite painful, again, you can start to think, what can I do to break this vicious cycle? And again, when it comes down here, remember this here, body sensations, emotions, actions, and thoughts. So the idea is to get you to be able to march to the beat of your own drum. Well, our body sensations, we can do breathing exercises, we can do mindfulness, we can do exercises, we can do physical activity, and that will help calm our body sensations down if we're agitated. If we're depressed and we're feeling very numb and very low, we can become physically active to kind of give us that sense of energy. So we can break it there by doing something with our body sensations. Let's use a different colour just to make that a bit clearer. So we can break it here by doing something with our body sensations. With our emotions, we can identify them, we can express them, we can name them, we can tolerate them. So again, we can break the vicious cycle here. Our actions, we can do things which are helpful, not do things which are unhelpful, and resist the urge, and that's very important. Sometimes we have the urge to do something which in the short term is probably going to be quite helpful, and self-harm is a really good example of that. When you talk to people who self-harm or even use drugs or alcohol, often what they're trying to do is escape the immediate pain, escape the immediate emotions. And it does work in the short term. Unfortunately, in the long term, it really does disempower you. It gives the emotions much more control. So we can break our emotions, we can break our body sensations, We can resist the urge to act in an unhelpful way and do something helpful. And we can break the cycle by challenging our thoughts, by accepting our thoughts, by letting our thoughts go. So on the overhead, I'll just flip over. So remember, you have body sensations, you have emotions, you have actions, and you have thoughts. So with our body sensations, if we are anxious and agitated, we can reduce our body sensations by breathing, by doing mindfulness, by doing muscle relaxation. And if we are feeling numb or nothing, we can increase them by doing exercise, by making ourselves physically active. Our emotions, we can identify them, we can name them, we can express them, we can regulate them. And regulate simply means doing something about them, doing something to control them. One way people regulate their emotions, if people want to have fun, they might go and see a funny film. They might watch a favourite film on television. They might go to the fun fair. They might do lots of things to make themselves feel good. Well, if you can do things to make yourself feel good, why can't you do things to make yourself feel less uncomfortable when the emotions are very powerful? So emotional regulation is very hard, but it is possible. And of course, if we can't do any of those things, we can tolerate them. Because remember, emotions come and go like a wave, and we can do things up here to stop them becoming overwhelming and powerful. But if we get to this point up here, there's my little man surfing the wave, we just have to surf the wave until it reduces. Our actions, we can do it if helpful. And remember, if it's helpful to the long term, and not do it if it's unhelpful. So we can do some things there. Our thoughts, again, we can identify them, we can accept our thoughts, we can challenge our thoughts, and we can let our thoughts go. So these are the various techniques that you can use to help you break this vicious cycle down at the bottom. Hopefully, when you break the vicious cycle, it won't go back and reinforce these unpleasant things. Now, if we just turn over again, so we have our past here, we have our present here, and we have our future here. And remember, we might have a memory from the past, something might be happening in the moment, there might be a worry about the future, and very quickly we get that spiky feeling, and our behaviours, our emotions, our body sensations, our body, our emotions, our actions, and our thoughts can very, very quickly spiral and go back and reinforce this. And remember that our present can influence this, but this can also influence how we deal with things in the moment. This will also influence how we approach the future, and this spiky diagram will, this spike here will influence our past. So we can already see here that there's 1, 2, 3 areas that we can tackle, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, one of the things people have asked me is, why do I still use a flip chart when most people do their presentations with PowerPoint or using technology? There's a very good reason why I like to draw things up, and I really want to encourage you to draw things up. One of the best ways we can problem solve is by drawing pictures. So problem solving And all this is a problem to be solved. How can I make this spiky, horrible feeling more manageable? How can I stop my experiences, my unpleasant experiences, becoming the bigger, all-consuming part of who I am? It's simply a problem to be solved. When we draw things up, we become really good at solving problems. I'm sure many of you have used mind maps and various other things to draw things out and see where things connect. So that's one reason. The other reason, and you'll have to forgive my drawing for this one, I'll try and do it down here. If we imagine this is the human brain. So here's the front, so here's where your eye would be. My very bad picture. There's your nose, and there's your mouth. I think I've made that a bit worse. But there's your human brain. The part of our brain that deals with our emotions is down here, this area here. It's the limbic system, and it's particularly this part of the brain around here called the amygdala. Now that part of our brain deals with emotions. The part of our brain that deals with logic is up near the top, our frontal cortex. Now what happens is when we become aroused emotionally, when we become agitated emotionally, very, very quickly our amygdala sends messages all over the brain. And the term you've probably heard of is fight, flight, and there's freeze and appease. So what our emotions are doing is they are designed to make us do something. They're designed to get us away from danger. So the amygdala becomes activated here. Very, very quickly, it sends messages to all parts of our brain and say, hey, do you know what? We're in danger. We need to do something. So can I fight it? Can I flee it? Can I freeze and hide? So the example of that is if you think of a newborn baby foal or something, or a fawn, or an animal that can't run away, will sometimes like freeze, and you may have heard of the expression play possum. So hopefully by keeping really, really still, the danger will go away. That explains why sometimes when you're really, really stressed, really, really anxious, you can become frozen with panic and fear. Because what's happened is your body and your brain is saying, right, I need to protect myself. I can't fight this. I can't flee from it. I'm just going to freeze in hope that the danger passes me by and I don't see it. The other thing we can do is appease, and that's to try and calm the danger down by befriending it. And sometimes you see this with dogs. I have a Springer Spaniel, and it's funny because I have two Springer Spaniels. One's instinct is to flight. Anything goes off, any loud noises, anyone new, she runs away and she goes and hides. So her automatic response is fear, so she runs away. The other one, his automatic response is if there's a loud noise or a stranger comes, he immediately appeases, he immediately goes and he lowers his head, he kind of wags his tail, he submits, he rolls over, he puts his paws up. So he's saying, look, I'm not a threat, I'm not a danger, I'm not going to hurt you. So that's an example of two animals, one who flights, flees, and the other one who appeases. Now, our brain has all of these different parts. Now, different parts of our brain do different things. So, some of our brain deals with logic, planning. Some parts of our brain deal with memories, and some parts of our brain deal with making predictions. So what happens is the amygdala has become activated because this spiky, uncomfortable feeling has kind of got me overwhelmed. It's made my body sensations, my emotions, my actions and my thoughts enter into this very vicious spiral. And although I can do things to break it, it's going to take some time, but it's going to reinforce all of this here. So what the brain is doing is the brain is searching what is happening in the moment that could be a danger to me. We call that in psychology hypervigilance. It's really looking out for danger. It then says, what past experiences have been really similar to this and I've survived? Can I learn anything by looking back in the past? And then what the brain does is it makes predictions about the future. Now, the brain is wired to do this very quickly and very automatically. And one of the unfortunate things is it will look for and search and find unpleasant experiences. And the reason it does this is based on evolution. Pleasant experiences have led to something feeling good. Unpleasant experiences have probably been quite dangerous to us and our survival. So at this moment in time, the brain looking for pleasant experiences isn't going to be in its kind of evolutionary development. It's going to be looking for past, dangerous, unpleasant experiences which are similar to what it's experiencing now, so it can solve the problem. So very, very quickly, the amygdala sends all these messages out. Now, the logical parts of our brain, the reasoning parts of our brain, are kind of up here. And they do send signals back to the amygdala to say, hey, look, do you know what? I've had to think about this, had a look around, but there's no danger. So let's kind of turn down the panic down. Let's turn the fight, flight, freeze, and the peace down. The problem is, these pathways in our brain that lead from the amygdala and our limbic system to the other parts of our brain are like a high-speed motorway. They go really, really fast. The parts of our brain that go back from these logical thinking parts are like small little country lanes. So they kind of get there eventually, they just take a long time. So going back to why I like to draw things out, when you draw things out, you have to engage with your logical part of your brain. So if I start to think about my emotions and I start to draw what that emotion might look like, I start to think about what shape it would be and all these other things, what I am doing is I am deliberately making my logical parts of the brain kind of calm my emotional parts of the brain down. So that's one of the reasons, or that's the second reason I draw things out. What it does is it really does engage your logic. So the first reason is when you draw things out, you can kind of start seeing it like a mind map, you can start thinking about. But the other part, or the second reason, is when you draw things out, you engage the logical part of your brain. And I kind of think, well, do you know what? As a species, we've been able to put a man on the moon. And I think if we can be that clever and we can do such amazing things that we do in science and technology, I surely can draw out what's happening and think about, okay, my past and my present and my future is kind of leading to this uncomfortable feeling up here. I know that if I cover it up in bubble wrap, it's not going to go away. Those spikes are going to stick through and it's going to be really uncomfortable. I know that my body sensations, my emotions, my actions and my thoughts are going to spin out of control. And the whole cycle is going to just go and keep going. So, what about if we have the present here, the past there, and the future there? Remember, all of these are connected. And all of these lead to what can be this very uncomfortable, spiky feeling. And remember, it's our emotions that drive things. So I'm going to call that emotional mind. There are lots of techniques that we can do here. We can do skills training. So if I'm worried about dealing with a difficult person in the present moment, I can do some skills training in dealing with difficult people. If I'm worried about giving a presentation, I can practice. There's lots of things I can do. With our past, it can be much harder. Often in our past, we have to accept things. We have to be able to let them go. We have to be able to process them and maybe find meaning in them. In our future, we kind of want to be prepared for our future. We might be apprehensive about our future. We might be slightly worried about it, but we don't want to have panic and fear about our future. And remember, this goes down to our body sense. Oops, here I can't spell. Our body sensations, our emotions, our actions, and our thoughts. Now, the bit I haven't talked about is what we call our resource capital. So our resource capital are the things we have in life that can help us manage this more effectively. Now, the reason I've called it resource capital is it's a bit like capital in the bank. It's like money. You can put it into the bank, you can save it for a rainy day, and you can use it and withdraw it. So our resource capital, there are four main areas: our biological, our psychological, our social, and our spiritual. Now, these aren't all separate, they kind of are all connected. And I'll give an example about that in a minute. So our biological resource capital is our physical health, our well-being. It's avoiding substances, it's avoiding alcohol, it's looking after ourselves physically. It's also known what our biological strengths are. Some people are very good athletically, some people are very good pictorially, some people are very good in other ways. The basics of this will always be sleep, diet, routine, and activity, and being physical. Our psychological resource capital is things like our self-esteem, our self-confidence, the ability to tune into our emotions, to be aware of our emotions, the ability to be hopeful and optimistic about our future and our ability to cope. The major one might be, though, however, an openness to experience. For us not to be afraid that no matter what life throws at us, no matter what uncomfortable, spiky, yucky thing happens up there, we have the skills, we have the ability to deal with it. And you know what? If we can't deal with it, we can learn from it. Our social one is our connection to others. So that includes our personal relationships, our relationships with our colleagues. It includes being connected to the wider community, a sense of belonging. Part of that is our education, feeling that we've achieved what we'd like to achieve through our education, having a job that we value and feel is meaningful. So the big one for social might be trying to think to repair and maintain healthy relationships. And of course, some of us in life, we experience discrimination because of our gender, our ethnicity, our religion. So a big part of our social resource capital sometimes is overcoming kind of the prejudices and the stereotypes that society might place on us, and they can be really damaging to our well-being. The other final one is meaning and purpose and the bigger picture. So what I mean by that is our spiritual awareness and our spiritual resource capital is separate to our religious beliefs. Now, spiritual and religion, having spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs can be very much interwoven together, or they can be two separate things. Some people describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. Other people say they are spiritual and religious. By spiritual, though, I don't mean religion, although if that's part of what spirituality means for you, that's okay, because there is no right or wrong to this. What I mean to spiritualness is your sense of meaning and purpose, the sense of meaning and purpose that you can find in life and that you create in life. Meaning and purpose won't just fall into your lap, it's something that you have to actively create. Our spirituality also means awareness of the bigger picture. What can we do to make this planet a better place, not just for ourselves, but for other people? So it's being able to see beyond the I, the me, to look at the bigger picture, the we. Now, remember that on the previous one, I mentioned that when we get in this very distressed state, when we're overwhelmed by what's happening, we will focus on the unpleasant because we're trying to work out how to protect ourselves. We will look for past experiences that have been unpleasant because we're trying to find out what's happened in our past that's similar. And we will look and interpret the event in the most unhelpful or detrimental way because that's most likely to help us survive. So what happens is our sense of self becomes defined by these unpleasant experiences. These unpleasant experiences become bigger and bigger and bigger, and these pleasant experiences become less big. That's really bad English, I'm sorry. But imagine that this is who you are, and you are defined by your unpleasant experiences, and your pleasant experiences were so small. Now, some people say, well, what you do about that is you try and increase pleasant experiences. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that's a helpful way. I think if the only skill you have is to increase pleasant experiences to outshine this, you're going to be constantly in fear of it. What you need to be able to do is make this much smaller. So this is part of who you are, but it's not the defining part. So what you should hopefully have is an awareness that you are made up of a number of pleasant and unpleasant experiences, but you don't allow the vicious cycle and that spiky, uncomfortable feeling to get into the vicious cycle here, reinforce how you cope with the present, how you remember and reflect upon the past, and how you predict the future. But also remember, these things here will start to strip away your resource capital. So let's imagine just for a moment that I'm feeling very stressed and anxious about what's happening to me at the moment. I'm remembering all of my past failures and all the time it's gone wrong, and I'm making all these predictions about how awful this is going to be in the future. My body sensations, they're going to be very agitated, my tummy's going to be knotted, I'm probably not going to feel like sleeping or eating, I'm going to do less exercise, my emotions are going to be very powerful, very scary, very overwhelming. My actions, I might avoid things, I might not do things, I might shut myself away, I might do even more unhelpful things. My thoughts, I can't cope, this will be awful, everything I do. So then what happens is my resource capital, and remember, our well-being is built on our resource capital. If we don't have these resources, this is going to be, well, imagine this is sand, and you're building on really shallow foundations on sand. That might be an easier way to look at it. So if I'm not sleeping and I'm not eating healthily because I'm too stressed, if I'm not having an active routine and I'm not physically active because I'm just too low in mood and too anxious, I'm going to be able to less cope with what's happening in the moment, look forward and approach the future with an open mind, and deal with some of my past things. If I'm not open to experience because I'm scared of this spiky, uncomfortable feeling, I'm going to close down, I'm going to have a closed mindset, I'm only going to see the unpleasant things in life, the unpleasant things that have happened in my past, the unpleasant things that might happen in the future. If I'm feeling low in mood and I'm depressed and I'm anxious, I'm more likely to isolate myself, disconnect from my friends and family, shut myself away, so I'm not going to get the social support I need. If I'm feeling like this and not being open, I'm less likely to ask for help. So again, here, my social resource capital is decreasing. I may even struggle at work, I may even struggle at college or university. That's going to pile more stress on me. And then of course, finally, when I'm struggling and the present moment is very unpleasant, all I seem to be able to do is remember my past unpleasant experiences, and all I have to look forward to is the unpleasant future. My sense of meaning and purpose is going to be low. It's going to feel very unpleasant. It's going to feel very different, or very difficult rather. So just to recap, our present, past and future are all interconnected, and they're not written in stone. The past event is fixed, but the meaning of that event is not. Our present situation, our recollection from the past and our future can create very quickly this uncomfortable, horrible, spiky, feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed, feeling anxious. We can't cover it in bubble wrap, we can't hide it, we can't avoid it through drugs, alcohol, self-harm or other things, because those spikes will kind of come through. It then leads to our body sensations, our emotions, our actions, our thoughts, kind of fueling each other. So remember on the previous diagram, we talked about body sensations, emotions, thoughts, and actions entering into a cycle and then reinforcing. Then our biological, our psychological, our social, and our spiritual resource capital. And very, very quickly, what you'll find happens is a very unhelpful downward spiral. Now, the way our brains work and the way our bodies have evolved over millions of years is this happens like this, and it happens very, very quickly, and it happens outside of our awareness. So very quickly, we end up being defined by the unpleasant experiences, as opposed to being able to step back and be aware that as a human being, I have pleasant experiences and unpleasant experiences, and that I am a combination of both the pleasant and the unpleasant, and I can choose how I respond to that. I cannot block this out just by trying to increase the pleasant, sorry. So let's imagine we have the present, we have the past, we have the future, and remember, all of these things are interconnected, and they lead to that uncomfortable, horrible feeling, and that uncomfortable, horrible feeling feeds back to the present, future, and past. Now, on one of the earlier flip charts, I talked about that being emotional mind. So if we go back to mindfulness, here's our logical mind, which deals with facts. Here's our emotional mind, which is very much driven by our emotions. And in the middle, we have our wise mind, which is kind of the synthesis, the balance. It's the combination of logic and emotion kind of weaved in together. One is not more important than the other. Both are equally important. So if we look back here, I talked about this bit here. I think I wrote it down on one of them. Yeah, let's see if I can write that in a different colour. So let's just go over that. I talked about this here being emotional mind, then causing that to go. I've talked about some skills and some strategies to break that up. But you know, prevention is much better than cure. So what happens if, instead of it coming to here, and let's call this unhelpful, you see, unhelpful. So let's just think about that as an unhelpful beat. Remember, body sensations, emotions, actions, and thoughts. And that's the negative, unhelpful spiral. What happens if we went straight from becoming aware, reflective, and insightful of this spike? And before we did anything, we stopped it entering that vicious cycle by being mindful and getting into wise mind. In wise mind, our body sensations, we would be aware of them, we would notice them, but we would not get caught up in them. Our emotions, again, we would notice, be aware, not get caught up in them. Our actions, we would act wisely, we would act with wisdom, we would act with a balance of logic and emotion. Our thoughts, we would notice and we would let go. Now, very much there, I've talked about what we in psychology and in mindfulness call bare attention. Bare attention is this noticing, observing, and not get caught up in. But remember, if you've watched some of the previous videos, there's actually 3 types of mindful attention. There's bare attention, which is kind of noticing, observing, letting go without getting caught up in. But there's also expansive mindfulness, and expansive mindfulness is a little like a zoom, a kind of a wide-angle lens on a camera. You take in the big picture. I think of it as a landscape gardener, a landscape painter. A landscape painter is able to kind of notice how the trees, the river, the mountain, how all of the separate parts fit together in the composite of an overall picture with balance. So the expansive mindfulness would pull back and it would look at the big picture of how everything was created. Now, obviously, if you've drawn it out, it will be much easier for you to pull back, look at the big picture and say, okay, this is the messy chaos that's going on, but let's focus on this bit. So what you can do is you pull back, you look at the big picture, look at how all the separate parts combine to create the whole. And then what you do is you find your page. So you have bare extension. So let's do that. So you have expansive. And then the third type of mindfulness, so the first type of mindful awareness is bare attention, notice and let go. The second type is to pull back and see the big picture. And the third one is the constrictive. And that's like a zoom lens where you focus in. A bit like, I think of that one as a watchmaker. A watchmaker kind of can see all of the separate cogs, but knows how all of those cogs fit together and work together, but fit within the watch case. So here, the constrictive mindfulness will be focusing on one part of the big picture. So you have the choice of zooming out and looking at the big picture, then zooming in and focusing on a particular area, and then using bare attention to notice and let go if anything kind of gets in your way. Now remember, with your resource capital, you actually have quite a few areas to look at. You can find meaning and purpose in the experience you're having. You can be socially connected to others. You can ask them for help. Social connection is actually very much linked to the biological. As human beings, we have a need to be socially connected to others. We also have a biological need to be connected to nature. Pets are another thing, living things. So human beings have a need to be connected to living things, be they plants, animals, or people. We have our psychological resource capital, and again, of course, we have our biological resource capital. Now, earlier, I said that these 4 areas of our resource capital are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. I said that they're all interconnected. So one example is social and biological. Human beings have a biological need for social connection to other people. One really good example is cooking a meal. So let's imagine I was going to cook a meal. Well, having a healthy diet and cooking a healthy meal is going to be a biological, so eating well, eating healthily. If I cook a meal for other people, I'm having a social interaction. If it's a meal that people enjoy, that enhances my friendship, people appreciate it, it's kind of enhancing my sense of meaning and purpose, and it's my sense of doing something for other people. So cooking a meal, we can see our biological resource capital, our social resource capital, and our spiritual resource capital. And of course, psychological. If you cook a meal, you have to plan it, you have to arrange it, you have to buy your ingredients, you have to cook, you have to use creativity, you have to be open to the new experience of cooking or savouring the experience of cooking. So your psychological resource capital. So these areas of our resource capital are not separate, they're all interconnected. Our present, past, and future are not separate, they're all interconnected. So what we can start to see is actually, let's see if we can just draw this out. So one of the things I've said is when you draw things out, you kind of engage the logical part of your brain. Now, what we can see here is I've explained this, and it probably looks a little bit confusing and a little bit messy. So what we can do is we can draw things out a number of times to kind of get our head around it. and to work out where we are. And then we can step back and say, okay, how can we make that a bit clearer? So what we can have is we can put the present here, we can put the past there, and we can put the future there. We can remember that apprehensions and worries about the future can cause this horrible, uncomfortable, spiky feeling. Recollections from our past can cause that uncomfortable, spiky feeling. Present challenges can cause that uncomfortable, spiky feeling. Once that spiky feeling has been created, whether it's created from a past memory, a worry about the future, what's happening now, will trigger the other areas, because our past, present, and future are all interconnected. We know that will lead to certain body sensations, certain emotions, certain actions, and certain thoughts. We know that they can spiral and feed back into this cycle, but we also know that this is all built upon our psychological, social, biological, and spiritual. And these things here also feed back in. So what you can do is, from that very, very messy previous flip charts I've created, you can start to draw this out and say, what is going on? What is happening? What is happening in the present that is causing me to get into this very, very uncomfortable place? What has that triggered about my past? How has that made me view my future? So remember, the idea is that all of us as human beings in our past up here, we all have pleasant and unpleasant experiences. When this downward spiral kicks in, these unpleasant experiences get bigger and bigger. We will remember more unpleasant experiences from our past. We will interpret the present as more unpleasant. We will predict our future as more unpleasant. And these pleasant ones become fewer and fewer. The way of dealing with that by increasing the pleasant does not work. What it does is it leaves you in fear. And what you're constantly trying to do is use pleasant experiences to overshadow, to outshine unpleasant experiences. The unfortunate thing, as a human being, we can never protect from unpleasant experiences. They will happen. The only thing that we can do is know that when those unpleasant experiences happen, and they will, the only thing we can do is become aware of this vicious cycle and know whereabouts we can break the vicious cycle and stop the vicious cycle becoming overwhelming. When we have done that, we stop the unpleasant experiences becoming bigger and bigger and becoming a more all-consuming part of who we are. So they're part of us, but they are not the defining part of us. We are much more than any one experience that we've had. If we can become aware, reflective, and insightful, when this happens, we can get into wise mind, where we balance logic and emotion. And remember, one way to do this, one way to really get your logical brain into gear and get your logical brain working, is to draw things out and to map them out. We can see how our past, present, and future interact to create that uncomfortable feeling, how it leads down to our body sensations, our emotions, our thoughts, and how it feeds into our resource capital. When we can see all of that, we can use the expansive mindful awareness to look at the big picture. We can use the constrictive mindful attention to focus in on our area and we can notice and let go of anything that's unhelpful. So hopefully in today's video, you've seen how we are made up of lots of separate parts: our present experiences, our past experiences, our future, our psychological, social, biological, and spiritual resource capital, the emotions we feel, the thoughts we have, the body sensations we experience, and the actions we do. And you can see how we are a combination of the parts and the whole. And that really, to be able to get on top of our well-being, we need to be aware of the parts, we need to be aware of the whole and how they all connect together. We can do this by drawing it out, because that engages our logical, our thinking part of our brain, our frontal cortex. It helps calm down our amygdala and our limbic system, which deal with emotions. And when we've done that, we can just treat it as a problem to be solved. My problem to be solved is, how do I break the downward spiral and how do I create an upward spiral? When you have those skills, you will be able to manage your well-being, your happiness, and your success. You will be successful in what you do because you won't be afraid of your emotions. You'll be in control of who you are. You won't be defined by past experiences. Past experiences, yeah, they've happened, they've gone, they've made you who you are, but they do not have to define who you are. This is very different to just trying to increase pleasant experiences and pleasant emotions. Doing that is really a type of avoidance. It's avoiding that life does have unpleasant experiences, and that for us to live a full life where we're open to our experiences, where we're not afraid of our experiences, we have to do more than just create pleasant things, because we can't do that forever. Life will not allow us to do that. No matter how hard we try, we will unfortunately have unpleasant experiences, difficult times. It is those difficult times and our ability to understand them and how they influence us that allows us to grow, that allows us to manage our well-being, that allows us to be happy because we're not afraid, and allows us to be successful because we are able to we are able to take on the challenges of life directly. I hope today's talk has been very helpful. If there's any information you'd like, I have a number of leaflets and I do have a handout. If you'd like to have a copy of this, where it's kind of laid out for you to have as a template, they're very easy to do, but if you'd like a template, if you message me, I can let you have one. If you want to try doing this, it's a fantastic way for you to really get to grips of the factors and all of the parts that combine into the whole. If you give it a go and get stuck, give me a call, let me know. This is one of those things where it's really obvious, I think. It can be really simple and you think, yeah, that makes sense. But when you sit down and do it, it can be quite tricky. So sometimes a little bit of coaching and a little bit of support to help you understand how you can create these yourself is very helpful. Also, there's a number of different techniques that I haven't talked about that can make the past and the future and your present much easier to manage. Again, to take the fear out of them so that you are open to your experiences, so that you can look forward with a very positive, with a growth mindset. Thank you very much for listening. I hope today's been useful. I'm Pat Guar, clinical psychologist.